Hi, I'm David Nolen. This talk is called a ClojureScript Survival Kit. Before we get to the, actually, hold on. Give me a second. Wrong slide. Gotta start on the right slide. Okay, ClojureScript Survival Kit. Before we get started on the main course, let's just go through some appetizers here. I'm launching a Node ClojureScript REPL here. Let's make it just a little bit bigger. So yeah, it's been a while since I've given a talk at a Clojure conference. Today I have a lot to talk about. I'm pretty excited. I think and hopefully there's some inspiration for you, for those of you that are using Clojure and ClojureScript together. And for those of you who haven't done that yet, maybe you can look at this like, wow, that's awesome. I want to try that. So yeah, hello ClojureCon 2025. Let's start off with some functional tidbits, right? Some Clojure core functions. Let's work with some purely functional data structures. One dimension of ClojureScript and Clojure that I always loved when Rich came out with Clojure was like, oh wow, I don't have to leave my REPL. I can like check the doc string or the arg list for some function. Like that's really, really, really nice, right? That we can do that right at the REPL. I think it's a great feature of the language. You might not know that actually you can do this with JavaScript APIs now in ClojureScript, right? So I can get the doc, the arguments list for array index of. This is a brand new feature. I can't get into like all the new things in ClojureScript, but suffice to say there will be a new release and you get to play with all these toys. We now have a way to refer to globals. Those who've been doing ClojureScript for a long time, you always had to prefix JS. We can get at those now in a disciplined way. You can say my namespace depends on these globals. So I can use date, I can use console log, I can get the docs for that, and that all just works. So that's really cool. This works with external inference, yada yada yada. This is a ClojureScript feature. It's available in Figwheel, Shadow, CLJS, whatever you like to use. I'm going to close this for now. Whoops. Sorry, one second. Yes, I want to get rid of that. Okay, what is ClojureScript? We might, it's like, I think it's time. It's been 14 years of ClojureScript. It's a long time. I think it's time to like revisit what's the value props. It's like, Rich came out with ClojureScript in 2011 and my mind was blown. And I think it's a good time to remember what are the actual value propositions of ClojureScript. It's a dialect of Clojure that targets JavaScript runtimes. Yes, we get to do Clojure programming and we get to target JavaScript. We have access to Clojure core in the form of CLJS core. There are some differences, of course, it's like the host and the compilation model. Basically like there's some differences around JavaScript, and yes, of course, we were compiling source to source, not to JVM bytecode. But over time, like Clojure encompassed more and more of like what we expected from Clojure, the programming language. So back in 2017, the fidelity was good enough that ClojureScript could compile itself into JavaScript, and that's still true this day. So ClojureScript really feels like hardcore Clojure. Something that we probably forgotten a little bit, except for like, yeah, Google strings, their array, is that like it comes bundled with Google Clojure library, and I might have more to say about that later. REPL integration, like it's not Clojure if it's not REPL-driven development, right? With the rise of React, and you see this even like in Dart and Swift, it's like hot code reloading, and it's like that's a very narrow part of what REPL-driven development's about. When Rich presented ClojureScript in New York with relevance, it was like, yeah, browser REPL, right? I'm in my text editor, I can interact with the browser while I'm writing my program. Oh, that's awesome. This is what we want. And then finally, Rich had this idea, is that like, as Clojure developers, we don't want to work in like a language that doesn't have that many features, it doesn't have much power, right? Like especially back in 2011, like JavaScript was not a very powerful language, right? You had to go elsewhere to do anything with it. It was a very restricted language. Whereas we have this very rich language with a very large standard library, but we do care about what the final artifact's going to be. We don't want to like generate all this code. So ClojureScript generates code that's designed to work with the Google Clojure compiler and has advanced optimizations. And the big optimization there is dead code elimination. It does a bunch of other things, but that's the big one. I can use a library, has 1,000 functions. If I only use one thing, that's all I'm going to get. Without it, like a trivial ClojureScript program in theory would be like 3 megabytes of generated JavaScript. If I did JS console log hello world, that would be 3 megabytes of JavaScript. But with advanced compilation, it's just a few bytes, especially after compression. More on that later as well. Okay, so Clojure rocks JavaScript reaches. Looking at the sort of like landscape of what we're doing together as a community, I would say a significant slice of ClojureScript dev is React dev. I mean, you might be, it's hard to remember because now it's in the past, but like we were the very first adopters of React, where the rest of the industry was like, this is dumb, I'm never gonna use that, right? We were like, it was almost overnight that the Clojure community transitioned to it because it was the only sort of like easy to integrate solution that allowed people to do functional UI programming. And React went from a thing where it was like just a script tag, right? It was just a script tag you added to your page, and then I wrote some ClojureScript. That was it. That's how it worked in the beginning. It's gone into an all-encompassing ecosystem, and unfortunately for various reasons, Facebook kind of forced everybody into the JavaScript tooling, and we kind of had to adapt. But the main thing is, I think now among our community, ClojureScript and React, very mature solution. People know about it. There's not that much mystery there. A lot of annoyances, but not much mystery. You can build single-page apps. You can do mobile apps. It does work. But again, JavaScript tooling came along for the ride because Facebook pushed everything into like the Node ecosystem. ClojureScript made some changes to account for that, but it was never like, I always wanted to hold that stuff at arm's length. I was like, I know about that stuff, and it's very scary to me. And Shadow came along and, of course, made this a lot more easier to use, right? Because it is complicated, and you have to know a lot, and Shadow made it so that, as a Clojure developer, you didn't have to care too much about it, and it mostly worked. But unfortunately, the complexity always lurked. And for those of you who've spent a lot of time building React apps, in the end, it's very hard to avoid the complexity of the JavaScript ecosystem. And clearly, in 2025, there's still absolutely no interest in fixing any fundamental problems, right? I mean, it's like, now we have NPM supply chain attacks. Yay! It's not going to change. It's simply not going to change. And now most of the tools, like the big tool now is Vite. And like, Vite's answer to this problem is choose your adventure. Which 10 frameworks of the day do you want to do it? And just like A, B, C, D, E, F, and then at the end of that, you press enter, and you have half a gig of JavaScript in your no modules folder. What does that stuff do? I don't think anybody actually knows, but at least it's easy, right? So I don't think, this is like the whole experience of it's so antithetical to the Clojure philosophy. We just put up with it as a community because, yeah, we are also a very production-oriented culture, right? We want to ship stuff. We want to use Clojure to make a living, so we accepted it. I think this talk is about that. I think the calculus has changed, and we're going to look at the various bits of technology that I think we can take matters into our own hands. So post-apocalyptic software dev, a fairy tale. Imagine we're in the middle of a software zombie apocalypse. I know I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but just imagine for a second we are. Imagine for a moment that there's no NPM. In fact, that there's not even any ClojureScript libraries anymore. All you have is a few Git clones on your laptop, and in your inventory, you've got your wits, you've got your bare hands, and you've got a few simple composable tools, right? We're gonna have to recreate civilization. It's ended. We have to start over. So the first thing is just to take stock of our surroundings, like where are the safe places? Where can I hide? Where can I start building it back up again? Fortunately, we start looking around. It's like some things have come a long way, and some of that is evergreen browsers, with the exception, unfortunately, of Safari. But it's been 10 years, right? It's been 10 years since 2013, since React came out. Even though Safari is on this step timeline, even Safari is an extremely modern browser. CSS is actually not that bad. Now, we have nested rules. All these things that people were using like Sass and less and yada, 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 CSS itself has incorporated a lot of those ideas into its syntax. Flexbox works really great. Finally, you don't have to use a table to do like center vertical alignment. You'll see like, I have a center vertical align button on my demo, and it's like, I didn't need a table for that. CSS tooling just feels generally less necessary. It's not like you don't have to use it, but again, the standard is very good. There's more optimization knobs. I mean, for a long time, people moved a lot of stuff into JavaScript because you just couldn't do it in CSS. Now with things like CSS grid, container stuff, as well as things like, no, don't try to reflow anything until this element intersects the viewport. There's a bunch of knobs, and it's definitely worth looking at. You can really lean on all the optimizations in the browser now. Always check browser tech first. This is the whole point of taking stock of your surroundings. There's a ton of stuff online. Baseline tells you when it appears, when it's available. Is it in Safari? Can I use is also a good resource here. Okay, that's the surroundings. Now let's take a look inside our survival kit. There we have ClojureScript, Clojure core, CLJ's core, the standard library. You've got the adjacent libraries, things like sets and dealing with data, writing unit tests. Cool. A lot of tools, right? There's a lot of tools that come in just in the ClojureScript package. But we often forget about Google Clojure library. There's way more stuff in there than Google Object and Google Array. And there's a misconception. People are like, well, why should I use this thing? Why should I use this thing? Isn't it just like weird Google versions of the DOM APIs? And that was never true, right? Google was never interested in replacing things that the browser already did. GCL was always, the browser does not do this thing, and we needed to do this thing. We're providing a standard library over the standard web stuff. And we'll see that. Occasionally there's things about ergonomics in there. And again, just many common problems. I could talk for like 2 hours about all the things you can do with Google Clojure that you might not be aware about. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show you two just key examples. So let's just imagine again, there's nothing out there. You just have GCL on your laptop via ClojureScript. So let's access and modify the DOM. So I'm going to load Google DOM. There's a button here. It's got a ID attribute. Whoops. I'm going to verify that. There's a style namespace in Google Clojure. I'm going to change the size of this button, change the corner radius. And something that people have forgotten, right? We've been doing React so long. There is no way to do multiple attribute setting, right? You could do this only by string concatenation. So Google Clojure provides this thing. That's why this namespace exists. To this day, you can't do that, right? So now that Google Clojure provides a data-oriented way to set multiple styles. And you see this, you will look, you can examine Google Clojure very closely, and time again you'll see, oh, that isn't something the browser does, and you might have forgotten about it because, React. Here's another one. I work at Lightweight Labs, and I started using this one because this one is really awesome. There isn't anything like this. There's a pop-over API in the browser, but this is way cooler. So Google Clojure has a way to position elements. You often need to, you're doing a tooltip, you're doing a popover or floating panel of some kind. So here's Google positioning. I'm going to load I need some enums to do this. I've got the button. I've written some markup. You can't see, it's hidden right now. And then I'm going to position, at the top left of the button with the bottom left of my little popover. And so there, right? So that's the thing. The browser doesn't have like this positioning API. It doesn't matter where it is in the page. Google. This library lets me position it wherever I want. I can go. I can reverse this, bottom left, and if I, top left, right. It also has affordances for like, well, what if you're too far to the left of the page and you would be occluded by the viewport? Well, you can like set it so there's a strategy. So if it's too far this way, use this placement strategy instead. If it's too far to the top, switch to the bottom. I mean, again, nobody wants to write this code. It's very easy to get it wrong. And Google Clojure has a thing. It's been sitting there, I don't know, for probably more than 10 years. Okay, a lot more stuff in there. I cannot, again, no time to talk about it, but you have like things like Google date math. Some of you know this through CLJ's time. You might not be familiar with the direct functionality. But one thing that's nice when you go direct, if you don't wrap it, because you have to be very careful, is that you're guaranteed that advanced compilation is going to work, right? This is a problem that the JavaScript community still has. If you need date time math, and suddenly like you've just loaded like 100 more K of compressed stuff. And that's unfortunate. If you use Google Clojure, you're going to get like 2 or 3 K. That's pretty awesome. Tons of stuff, accessibility, text selection, animation, XSS sanitization. I mean, it goes on. Arbitrary precision arithmetic. UI, there's actually UI components there, including the rich text editor that's used in Google Docs and spreadsheets. Everything that they use there, that editor is inside Google Clojure library. Okay, gonna keep going. So the big issue is that GCL is not familiar. People just don't know about it. LLMs actually, surprisingly, they do. They actually know it. Like I asked a lot of questions of making these slides. LLMs do know quite a bit about GCL and how it works. The GCL source itself is actually relatively approachable. It's very boring code. You look at it and it's like, oh yeah, of course, that's how you would write that. Tons of comments. But one thing I would like to see is I think, we still sit on a gold mine. Like, people are somewhat concerned like GCL, because actually we now control GCL because Google officially stopped working on it. But the truth is it wasn't changing very much. You can look at the source files, like the positioning library hasn't changed in 5 years, and it doesn't need to change, right? It just doesn't need to change. The browser, like Clojure, it's like a backwards compatible thing. So in some sense, GCL was like designed to be future-proof. They don't want to maintain it because, to be honest, they, from what I could tell, they were in the middle of restructuring a bunch of things, and they were like, we don't want to have to deal with the sort of, the people's feelings about this. We're going to move on. But I think as a community, it's still really great. I think that a lot of things are future-proof, and then as a community, if we start presenting this in a way that's easier to understand, like, let's update the styling, let's generate the docs, let's link them from ClojureScript.org. And then when people come like, what is this ClojureScript thing? And they go and they look and they're like, oh my gosh, there's just so much stuff that it does in the package. I'm never gonna have to download another dependency. I mean, for a very large amount of things. The UI components are cool. It would be, and this is tied to something I'm talking about in a second, which is web components. It would be amazing to like come to the site and be like, oh my gosh, I have all these standard components with ClojureScript examples. I don't have to use an external dep for. I mean, there's like tree lists, menus, submenus, all that stuff is inside of GCL. Okay, but wait, aren't you waving your hand like aren't you waving your hands? What happened? This is all like mutable APIs and the mutable DOM. Isn't that what we tried to get away from? Aren't you just skipping something? It's true that I have so far, but no, we're not going to get rid of that. We're going to stick with this idea of like functional UI programming. UI is a function of state. The main thing is that a lot of stuff has happened since React. People understand React and the world has moved forward in other communities, and I think we can steal some ideas here. There's been a big movement in some areas of the dev community around like HTML. Instead of doing the F of state from the front end, let's just do it from the back end. There's HTMX is one approach, Rails Turbo is one approach, Phoenix Live View is another approach, and then at work we're using a very modified version of Datastar to do this. What they do is they take the page, they send it to the client, and instead of doing a full page refresh, they morph the DOM. Right? So they take this idea, they get the new HTML, they parse it, and then they do just DOM to DOM diffing. There's no VDOM, it's just like parse the DOM into a DOM, compare it to the DOM that's there, and reconcile. And with like something like Phoenix Live View, you're building an SPA, but it's all back-end code. Like there's no client stuff except for this tiny thing that does the morphing. These people also are very skeptical about the sort of JavaScript world, and it's amazing. All these approaches I'm talking about, they all provide the morphing thing as a script tag. Like it's just like I can download JS, I can do a script tag, and I can just do it. Like they don't want people to use tooling to get this tiny bit of functionality that's required. At the same time, there might be various reasons, design decisions that you might want to use a pure client solution. This was news to me. There are other people in the Clojure community have said enough is enough, and they've made pure ClojureScript solutions to do React-style programming. Replicant is really cool. I was very impressed that it already sort of happened in the community. And I did a little demo. I said, okay, Vite, and like let me build a prod Vite thing with React, and it's like, okay, that's 60K compressed, right? And I said, let me do it with Replicant, and Replicant's like 30K compressed. And of course, the Vite one would be bigger because you would have to add ClojureScript to it. So Replicant is smaller than doing things with JavaScript. There's also Shadow Grove. That's Thomas Heller of Shadow's fame, Shadow fame, and he is also interested in this. He's not making a library for everybody to use, but I think it's a great source of inspiration that there are other sort of leaders in the community that are thinking about this. Like, I've done this for 10 years. I think we could do it better. So before we move on really quick, let's just talk really quickly about morphing, because I don't think that many people have seen this. So let me just refresh this. So here, okay. I'm gonna take a 13-year-old library. Chris Granger, 13 years ago, wrote a thing called Crate, and it took Hiccup, and it converted to DOM. I can use this today. Nothing has changed. It's a 13-year-old library, it just works. There's very rare that this is true for JavaScript. I'm going to use this plus a library that's a week old called Morphlex from the, I think, the Ruby community, which does morphing. So here, I'm going to load this. Note that I've included Morphlex as a script tag, and there's a new feature in ClojureScript. I can just use the script tag without build config. So Morphlex is on the page. I'm requiring a global library as a namespace, and I'm going to use it. Here's a little, take some text, and it's going to produce the same DOM structure as it's already present in the browser, and that's it. Morphlex is 2 or 3K compressed, right? 2 or 3K compressed, and I didn't use React at all. It was just ClojureScript and a script tag. We've seen a few things. Okay, so ClojureScript's great. GCL has a bunch of low-level tools for us to use, and now you've seen that even morphing, this idea that React had of diffing, that can be presented a la carte. We don't need a framework to do that for us. Because there's really a problem with sort of like what I want to call framework feudalism, right? I've been doing JavaScript stuff for 20 years. I've been doing JavaScript stuff. Frameworks keep recreating the same components over and over again, right? The same thing. And the thing is that once a framework dies, what good are those components? These quote unquote reusable components, they're no good at all. Right? It's just like frameworks don't really interoperate. I mean, it's just a lie, right? These components are not reusable or only reusable within the context of where they live. And therefore, of course, it makes sense. They keep getting reinvented over and over again without really making it any better for the end user or us as a developer. And then you start thinking, too bad we can't create custom HTML tags, right? If we could just create custom tags, this problem would go away because then it didn't matter. Except that you can, and we've been able to do this since 2016. Web components let you do this, right? One of the big problems with web components is that, early on it was very much about the shadow DOM, and the shadow DOM is really complicated. But you can actually use web components and just stick to the light DOM. And so let's look at that. So I have a little macro to simplify the syntax of defining a web component. Custom elements is a way to install your new tag. Sorry, let me because we want to look at this while I do this. So here's my custom component. They also have life cycles. So when it attaches to the DOM, it's going to say connected. When it gets removed from the DOM, say goodbye. I'm going to install my custom element. I'm going to get the main tag. I'm going to construct my new element. I'm going to set text content as if it was a real, like if it was a standard component. I'm going to add a text node to it. I'm going to append it. And then you see down here it said connected. It was attached to the DOM, and if I remove it, actually before I do that, there we go, my L, right? Click back here, and then, oops, removed. So we actually have a standard way to define custom components, and you can use this with anything. You could use it with React. You could use it with any of these morphing libraries. You could use it with the Google Clojure libraries and mutate the DOM. It will act as if it was a traditional, like a real component in the browser. So putting it all together, let me just show a quick demo of something that we're doing at my work at Lightweight Labs. So here, the details of it don't really matter. It's a general ledger. It shows a bunch of transactions. This is using RUM, so it's React, ClojureScript, all this stuff. And then, it's a virtualized table view because we're using AJAX. Okay. And that actually looks not bad, but let's sort of see how much work we're doing here. So let me just go here, and let me just record this, scroll around. All right. Okay. And so you can see here in this timeline, it's like, the amount of time we're spending in JavaScript is really just I think this is a very typical graph for a sort of a non-trivial, sort of ambitious React application. And especially if you take a look at the memory, it's like, while I was scrolling, there was a GC collection. So we have, at Lightweight Labs, we were like, let's try this approach where we just do DOM morphing, we move everything in the back end, and we use web components. So like web components for this hover, web components for these floating panels. And so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just scroll around and see what it looks like. And this is virtualized, but virtualized through the back end, not on the front end. So datomic, we're using datomic, we're loading rows, and as we get to a boundary, we're gonna load more stuff, and this is actually a full page morph. I'm morphing the entire page while I'm scrolling. Let's get that. There's nothing going on. There's nothing going on. Memory, let's look at memory. It's gonna be about 10 to 20 times less memory. So yeah, 3.2 megabytes to 9.8 megabytes. Yeah, I mean, there's just no comparison. Just the amount of work that's happening. You know, if I refresh this browser, it's just instantly reloading, right? Okay, so let me just close these. I don't need them anymore. Okay, you know, what's the recipe? In our case, we moved everything to the back end. It's a full page morph on the client. All complex interactivity is just a mixture of web components or direct DOM manipulation. The result is it's 30K broadly versus like 5.5 to 6 megabytes. There's a new thing I have no time to talk about called light mode. And so actually the ClojureScript part of that, it's only 10K. There was only 10K of ClojureScript on that last demo that you saw, compressed. It's mostly web component glue, and actually in our case, we don't even need persistent data structures for the work we were doing. So it's kind of cool in the sense of like, we were being extremely tactical. In our case, we just need this web component glue, and all of our actual functional UI programming is actually happening sort of on the back end. As you saw, way less memory, instant load times, and then just the amount of time we're spending in scripting, it's just collapsed. It was like 40 times more time is spent in scripting than in painting the screen. And now you can see in the new version that ratio is much better. Takeaways. Our approach is one of many. I'm not even saying that you should do it this way. It's something that you know, as a community, we can like start assessing. Is this interesting? Is it a good fit for the app that you're building? I think that the key point that I want you to have the takeaway is that, you know, we embraced a ClojureScript-centric view. And then we freely lifted ideas from elsewhere. There are other communities that also have this sort of like, what happens if we like change our perspective about how much JavaScript we need? Really excited about it. My coworker, David Yang, is giving a talk about this called A Tale of Two Architectures. I didn't have time to like dig into it. Go to David Yang's talk if you're interested. But in general, ClojureScript-centric solutions, I think it leads to simpler tooling, right? Again, all those neat demos I was showing, I used one external JavaScript library in all the demos that I showed. Simpler tooling, the dependencies are much simpler, easier to reason about, simpler semantics, says, hey, this is Clojure, and then just the bundles are way smaller. Just use ClojureScript. At the same time, I'm not being prescriptive. For those of you that have invested in like, you know, React everything, or you're doing React Native, I mean, if it makes sense, and you're succeeding, that's awesome. You should keep doing it. For those of you who've done it for a while, and like, I wonder if there's a different way to do it, hopefully this gives you some inspiration to try some new things. But the ClojureScript adapts, right? You know, like, I like to use ClojureScript on my blog, and in that context, I'm fine with jQuery style development. Some people are doing React stuff. Cool. Hopefully, people start getting more interested in this HTMX, post-HTMX approach to doing web apps. I think it's really neat. I think as a community, we could show the world an amazing version of a backend-centric, combining it with a sort of web-first, modern technologies approach. I think we could definitely wow people, because again, we have the power of Clojure in the back end, and ClojureScript when we need it on the front end. Yeah, and then maybe for some of you, you're like, you've seen some of these demo, and you have a completely different idea of like, you're like, wow, I see the pieces now to do something very different that I hadn't thought about before. That's it, that's all I had. Thank you.
Hey everyone, we're not quite done yet. We do have a few minutes for Q&A. If you do want to return to your seat and ask David a couple questions, we have some live microphones up here where you can ask David all your burning questions about ClojureScript and what else. Any questions? Or where's the microphone? Yep, there we go. Go ahead.
Hey David, that was great. Thank you. So my question is, that table that you had, the virtual table you're scrolling through with huge memory wins, do you have an example of that like, or something like, can we get like something like that on GitHub to just show people how to do this?
I think, you know, we probably should take some time to write like a technical blog post. But there is a person that's already done this stuff and has already written blog posts. His name's, he works for Lightweight Labs. His name's Anders Murphy. He actually had a couple of really cool articles on Hacker News. One was like 1 billion checkboxes. He wrote this thing, and actually, and I think he did one version of it had like the virtualized scrolling. He did a demo of this. So I would check out his thing. There's not that much in terms of the technical approach is different from what he's done. So Anders Murphy is the person. He did this thing called 1 billion checkboxes. And that's the post. He's great. He's definitely somebody to follow if you're interested in this stuff.
Thank you.
You mentioned, You mentioned you were using a heavily modified version of Datastar. Just curious if you could share like what kind of changes you've made to it.
We didn't modify Datastar. We're using it in we've pushed it down in the sense that we have an abstraction around it because we want a certain programming model. That I think is not so important, right? To me, the key takeaway is, if you just change your perspective, like that the functional UI programming thing is great, but if you shift things in the back end, I think you can have much simpler programs. You don't have to deal with, just front-end stuff that much. And at the same time, hopefully I've demonstrated there are moments where you're going to need this, like this, with the tooltips and these like panels. You're going to want more interactivity, but that can be very tactical. It can be very precise. It doesn't need to be, oh my God, everything has to be that way.
Hi, thank you for the talk. When you showed the slide with, I think you called it dev-file, so was that a Mac you had written specifically for the talk, or is it something coming in?
No. So I will as soon as they get off stage make all the slides public, including all the code. So you'll be able to see that macro.
One of the things React brought to the approach to testing was snapshot testing, where you can save what your React output was and compare that like you get like functional testing out of it. You don't have to worry about as much state. Do you have a testing approach you prefer with your just ClojureScript native approach?
No, but I don't see any problems with like doing snapshot style testing with what's been presented, right? It seems very compatible. But no, we're not using that feature right now, though I'm sure that eventually we'll want to do more of that.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Was there anything that has become very commonplace use cases with React where when you switch to the back-end approach, you said, okay, we ran into some roadblocks here that we really have to go in an unexpected direction to solve this problem, that React was doing in its sleep, so to speak?
I would say no, and I tried to show it in the demo. I mean, there was for example, it's not obvious, but so those tooltips and those filter panels, I wrote one web component for that. So in the back end, it's called we call it a popover thing, and what it automatically does is it automatically takes it, copies into the right place, and then uses the Google positioning to position it. So I wrote one component to handle any time I need something that's floating above the content. But that's a very typical React problem, right? It's just so typical, and it's non-trivial. And that was easy to, yeah, it's work, but it's not that hard to do. And to be honest, I definitely used some Claude. I was like, okay, yes, I know what to do now.
Very cool, thanks.
All right, that was our last question. So everyone give one more round of applause for David Nolen. Thanks, David.